Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for this opportunity, Asli Hanım, and so pleased to have this great chance to see this room that is so energetic, that has so much thought and so much innovation in it. And it's a great honor to be here today. Before I begin, I also want to join our Consul General as well in expressing condolences of our U.S. Department of Commerce on the terrible terrorist act of yesterday. And our thoughts and prayers are with all those affected and the victims. Türkiye başını sağ olsun. With that, as Asli Hanım very kindly introduced, I just want to get started with our first panel, which I think really captures some of the themes that we want to pull together today. Trade routes to tomorrow, Trans-Caspian corridor's potential. And this Trans-Caspian corridor, sometimes known as the Middle Corridor, is that key and emerging link in trade between East and West, between Asia and Europe, that's going to be importantly a potential driver for local economies and the value creation along the route. And it's also an area that is really ripe for American commercial engagement, working with our partners in the region. But we couldn't do it alone, and I'm very happy here to have a number of panelists. And if I can ask our panelists to join us right now on stage, can we welcome them, please? You have the bios online, but I'm just going to do some brief introductions as well so that we get to know some of our panelists who really bring a great sense of experience to this conference today. To my immediate left, working this way, I'm very pleased to welcome from Baku Imran Ahmadzada, who is the Chief Financial Officer of NEQSOL Holdings. And Mr. Ahmadzada has extensive experience in oil, energy, telecommunications, financial and industrial sectors. He oversees all asset portfolio and investment management for NEQSOL Holdings, and he serves as the head of Azerbaijan's office for NEQSOL Holding. He's a key figure in a number of the company's subsidiaries, many of them you will know, including Nobel Energy, Voda Ukraine, and Norm, which is the largest producer of cement in the South Caucasus. He holds an MBA in financial management from the Coburg University in Germany and is an alumnus of the Harvard Business School. To the left of Mr. Ahmadzada, very welcome to Claire Hollweg, who is the senior economist for Turkey. She is the senior country economist for Turkey, and she leads the bank's engagement on macroeconomics, fiscal policies, and trade. Her previous roles include senior country economist for Cambodia, as well as the World Bank's Trade and Integration Unit. Her work is emphasizing the importance of enabling environments for private sector growth and integration into global values chains. That's a very important part because we want to cover not only the trade route, but what happens along it. So we're very pleased that she's joining us. She previously worked with the government of South Australia and has her PhD and Master's in Economics from the University of Adelaide. Very also pleased to welcome, at the far end, Mario Antonio Ebcim, who is currently sales director for Boeing commercial aircraft based out of Istanbul. He was the director for strategy and market development for the Eurasia region and vice president for sales from 22 to 23. He joined the Boeing company in 2017 as regional director for marketing, covering 16 airlines throughout this very important space. And was involved in fleet planning activities and trading for the aviation future. He's also a founder of a cultural association based in Istanbul that promotes and conserves the Levantine heritage in Turkey. So very pleased. But before we start with the first question, which I'm going to pose to Imran, I want to also take the time to thank AmChams and the organizing directors here from the three main organizing elements here, AmChams, Türkiye, Bulgaria, and Greece. It's a fantastic effort that is already yielding the results. That kind of conversations that we can have today would not have happened without Asli Özeli and her fantastic team. Very pleased as well, and really many thanks to our U.S. consulate in Istanbul, thanks to our Consul General, thanks to Yasue Pai and Jimmy Church, and all of our team here as well for what they do. Before we get to the first question, let me try to frame a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish over the next 35 or 40 minutes. Make sure we all have a common starting point. And so if we look back 4 years ago, before COVID, or should I say since COVID, we've been doing a lot more thinking about the security and resilience of global supply chains. I think our colleague from Georgia brought this up a little bit. Russia's war in Ukraine and the subsequent sanctions and export controls placed by the US and EU have raised the cost of compliance for any transport through Russia, which has direct impact on this trans-Caspian corridor. Logistics, friend-shoring, near-shoring, security of supply and stockpiling, that's a conversation that's only happened in the last 4 or 5 years. And how do we build those secure, sustainable, competitive, prosperous global supply chains, and what's the role of the Trans-Caspian corridor in doing so? So let's switch quickly to the Eurasia context here as well. So how is this going to be an emerging trade bridge between the Asian and Eurasian and the European continents? A couple of facts just to get us all straight. It's just this Trans-Caspian corridor, with thanks to our organizers, you can get a good view of that right there. It's just under 5,000 kilometers, which is about half the length of the northern route through the Trans-Siberian Railway. And if fully optimized, which is a big if, and how do we do it, and that's one of the things I'd like to call out in this panel, it will be able to deliver goods in 12 to 15 days versus 19 through Russia, versus over 20 through more traditional seaborne routes that you'll see at the bottom of the graph. I think importantly, we're seeing some of the regional cooperation going on. We see how Azerbaijan, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Türkiye have signed a roadmap that's going to list priority investments and actions needed to improve this Trans-Caspian corridor. Last year, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Kazakhstan agreed on the creation of a joint logistics operator along the route, a very key move. If it's properly debottlenecked and that we can work out both the soft and hard infrastructure issues that are present, I believe the World Bank believes that by 2030, the corridor can move 11 million tons of cargo per annum, up from 4 million today, under 500,000 just 2 years ago. So how do we ensure that local economies create the right environment for trade and investment for American firms, but also importantly, keeping that investment, that value, those jobs in the region, creating that prosperity in these countries, which will create a further virtuous cycle, I think, for further development as well. And that's a model that's very different from how China operates. We look at it differently. So fortunately, we have some great panelists who can really, I think, provide private sector, lender, and other perspectives. We're going to leave a little bit of time for questions. We hope to be able to get some from the audience. So as you're thinking here, please hold your questions to the end. But let's get to the first question. So Imran, thank you for coming from Baku. It's great to have you here today, and thanks so much. But you bring, I think, the very important private sector view to how all of this is going to go. Now, we talked a bit about NEQSOL Holdings. You have business segments in construction materials, energy, telecoms. You could be a provider to some of this corridor. You can also benefit from it directly through improved logistics. As the CFO, you have the responsibility for looking at projects in the region. Right. You're managing risks, you're assessing the ROI, you're attracting quality partners and suppliers, and logistics is a critical segment of this. Give me a sense from a private sector perspective. How can we increase the utilization of the corridor? Where do you think we're leaving money on the table of how we can do better? And what do you think might be some of the key performance indicators as we go forward? Please, to you, Imran.
Michael, first of all, thank you for the question, and I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers for organizing such a remarkable event. And I would like to highlight that AmChams Azerbaijan is also represented here with big delegation, which shows high interest and engagement to the topics we discussed today. Well, Michael, as you rightly mentioned, Middle Corridor is a very strategic discussion today, not only for the public sector, but also for the private sector. It's an untapped market, and there are lots of opportunities for investment here, but we also need to understand that funding of the private sector is quite expensive. So the cost of capital is quite expensive. And as investors, we all look to a variety of projects, and we, of course, choose projects with the most let's say, appropriate risk and return concept. So we really need to understand the challenges of the middle corridor as well when we're talking about investments. If we look to the corridor and to the capacity, it's important to mention that we need to look at the component of the corridor with the lowest capacity. So what I want to say is that if, for instance, Port of Baku increased its total capacity to 50 million tons, but we have a bottleneck alongside of the route somewhere, then that's where we need to look at. And if you look to the whole route for the whole countries, there are lots of infrastructure projects required almost in all countries. And those type of infrastructure projects are long-term projects that require source of cheaper funding with grace periods, and that's something that I believe governments, first of all, with support of IFIs, need to manage. But when we're talking about middle corridor, I would like to bring into your attention that we should look at it in a bit broader scope. It's not only about the transportation route, actually, but it's also about, for instance, the electricity corridor. In 2022, you know that there was an agreement signed by the European Commission to fund transportation of electricity, green energy from Azerbaijan to European countries. As far as I know, the expected funding is around 2.3 billion euros. But also at the same time, another great example of a project in Middle Corridor is a Digital Silk Road project that is successfully implemented by NEQSOL Holding. So this is about connecting Asia to Europe through the fiber optic cable. So we now have the infrastructure under the Black Sea fiber optic cable, we have the terrestrial infrastructure in South Caucasus, and now we are implementing the first, actually, Trans-Caspian project, building the fiber optic cable sub-Caspian with our Kazakhstani partners. As a result, we will connect Asia and Europe, and this will be the shortest internet route with the least latency. This will bring internet connectivity to the whole region, improve the internet connectivity to the whole region, especially to the Central Asian countries, where some countries have internet penetration of 22–21%. And I would like to highlight that according to studies, there is a clear correlation between economic development and access to internet connectivity. So once there is a better internet connectivity, this will definitely boost local GDPs, this will boost cooperation between these countries, and I'm sure that this will also help to the overall successful implementation of the Middle Corridor.
Imran William, thank you very much. I think it's important that you've emphasized that it's not just the hard infrastructure, the rolling stock, the steel, but it's the soft infrastructure, it's the fiber optic, it's other things that have to be done to be bottlenecked. That's a great transition, I think, to Claire. And we appreciate you coming from Ankara. Thank you for joining us, Claire, today in Istanbul. I think that, you know, I want to pick up on a theme that Imran William kind of mentioned about international financial institutions, and there's no question that the IFIs are going to be play a really crucial role in making this investment. And you know, you had mentioned a little bit about the EU. I know that this global gateway that EU has allocated about 10 billion euro for digital and transport links along the corridor. I know that the EBRD has identified, I think, over 30 infrastructure projects that would have immediate impact on the efficiency and capacity of the corridor. And I know that we have an EBRD colleague who's going to speak a little bit about their activity in the region later today, so encourage you not to miss it. But also, I know from the United States perspective, I know President Biden and our G7 partners have been very strong about this Partnership for Global Infrastructure initiative announced a couple of years ago. So Claire, give us the World Bank perspective. I mean, how do you see the bank playing the role with your partner lenders in developing this corridor?
Great. Well, thank you very much for the question, and let me also start by saying how excited I am to be here today, this morning, to share the World Bank's perspective on the development of the Trans-Caspian corridor. The development of the corridor is going to require a multi-year, multi-country, multi-sectoral effort, and the World Bank plans to accompany countries in the region with analytical work, technical assistance, convening power, and financing of key transport investments. First and foremost, the World Bank has a role in providing sovereign financing to governments. The corridor entails significant financial efforts, part of which will need to be financed through public funding and part by the private sector. Now, our financing at the World Bank allows governments along the corridor to make the necessary large-scale investments in infrastructure such as transport networks, energy grids, and water systems. Now, these public investments have the potential then to crowd in private investments along the corridor, as we just heard. And here, the International Financial Corporation, which is one of the organizations of the World Bank Group, they can play a meaningful role as well. If you're not familiar with the IFC, they're the largest global development institution focused on the private sector in emerging markets. A second role of the World Bank in developing the corridor relates to governance and institutional capacity. So infrastructure investments are only as effective as the policies that support them. So through technical assistance and advisory services, the World Bank works with governments to help create an enabling environment that can also crowd in private sector investment into the corridor. And then the third role I'd like to mention relates to convening stakeholders. So effective stakeholder interaction is really imperative for the successful development of the corridor. And here the World Bank can facilitate dialogue between countries and really help harmonize regulations and promote coordination efforts. I'd like to share a little bit about our engagement in Türkiye. Türkiye today plays really only a tangential role in the Trans-Caspian corridor for transit traffic between Asia and Europe. And this is the result of really two factors: limited network in terms of both connectivity and capacity. We've done analytical work at the World Bank that shows that this can be overcome with a program of targeted and well-sequenced investments in infrastructure. I would like to mention that on December 5th, coming up, my colleagues are expecting to take a $1.6 billion operation to the board, and this is going to finance improvements in the Turkish sections of the Trans-Caspian Corridor Railway, leading from the Sivas province in the center of Turkey to the Georgian border along through Kars. $660 million is World Bank financing, and the remainder is co-financed with AIIB and the Islamic Development Bank. And this investment is really going to rehabilitate and modernize the existing and outdated infrastructure along this railway. It's going to cover 670 kilometers in length. Just a second point, you may have heard recently the Ministry of Transport reference World Bank support for a new high-capacity overland railway linking across the Bosphorus, the third bridge. And I want to say that we're very pleased to be supporting the government of Turkey in exploring this option. Currently, we've provided $25 million in financing to support preliminary technical studies to develop this crossing. Now, the construction of the third bridge rail would facilitate the development of other intercontinental corridors via Turkey. One example is the proposed Iraq-Turkey-Europe Development Road project. The Bosphorus crossing would eliminate the last barrier to uninterrupted trade corridors spanning Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. So when you put all of this together, this means you can now send merchandise from Arab countries to China, from Arab countries to Europe, and from China to Europe, all passing through Turkish territory. So the aspiration of all of this investment is to really make Türkiye a regional logistics hub, which in itself entails a large role for private sector investment. Thank you.
Claire, thanks very much. That really gives a sense. I think there's two takeaways from that before I move on to Mario Antonio is, you know, first of all, definitely, I think you kind of hit upon how Turkey is really some of the epicenter of bringing a lot of this logistics together. So much that comes through here, rail, air, road is very important. And then to see this upcoming announcement on December 5th with regard to the over $1 billion loan that's going to be going in to improve that Turkey-Georgia. I like to say, money talks and something else walks. So great to see how World Bank works. It's terrific. So Mariano Antonio, let's turn to you for a little bit. And you've had a lot of experience in the region. You've been working in Eurasia for some time. Let me kind of set the question for a second. So this corridor had, started discussion about it maybe a decade ago, but so much has happened since then. Obviously, the People's Republic of China continues its very specific investment model in the region. But I think what we're hearing a lot is that a lot of host governments want more sustainable investment. They want investment that's sticky, that stays in the country of operation, that fuels further economic prosperity through, as has been mentioned by Imran, some of this internet development, internet connectivity, and economic development all connected together. We've had in the last 2 years Russia's war in Ukraine, and that has significantly increased the compliance risk over that northern route, and that makes the Trans-Caspian corridor that much more attractive. We focus a lot, I think, on the rail, the road, the sea-based cargoes, a lot of the terrestrial elements, including fiber optic. But there's also this all-important air component, this air cargo component. And I know you have some interesting data to bring to us about how much, while it's a small amount of tonnage in the region, the level of value and the amount of value creation is huge. So give us a sense of what you see. How do we ensure that all of this investment creates value all along the corridor, not just in a narrow band, but throughout, that it's wide and far?
Thanks, Michael. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you in Istanbul as the biggest ecosystem that is called Eurasia. We at Boeing, we cover this big region from Istanbul, but we constantly travel to Central Asia, Caucasus, and the Balkans, and it's nice to see familiar faces from all over this region. As you see on the map, as Michael was pointing, you see the routes, by sea and by land, but you don't see, of course, the 3D, which is the air. And it's a very important component that you should really take into consideration. Why? Because among the world tonnage carried in a year, maybe less than 1% is carried by an airplane, or let's say air cargo. But the dollar value that is equivalent is 35% of the total. So it's very important because what you carry are very important high value freights. And why do we see during the right after COVID, and especially what happened in 2022, we see a lot of cargo flights departing from the region. I was just this morning plotting a bit on the database to see, how this evolved. And when you look at the departures from the Caucasus and Central Asia, only on the cargo side, the flights doubled. And it's not only local, but international players, and Turkish Airlines is one of them with Turkish cargo. So we as Boeing, we monitor this region closely. We have access to a lot of data, and we see very interesting data coming out from what is going on. Air cargo is, you have long-term drivers for air cargo growth, and it's the evolution of supply chain strategies, which we see worldwide, and especially in Asia, when people are looking to diversify their supply chain from China and outside. And then e-commerce growth is very important. So Eurasia is among Europe and Asia, and this is a trade flow that's going to grow by roughly 5% per year during the next 20 years. And the e-commerce is a very important component. So when you look at the e-commerce growth in Europe, and I have a data here that I need to find, but it's around 9% until 2029 in Europe. But the most interesting part is Central Asia. In 2023, the e-commerce sales was around 12 billion. In 2032, it will be around 160 billion. This is an estimate. So 33% growth per year over the next 10 years on e-commerce in Central Asia. And this requires, of course, this is thanks to the digitization as well of the region. And this will require fast-moving means, and this is why air cargo is important. So when we look at the geography, when we start from Sofia, for like Bulgaria and Romania, close to the Black Sea, having one feed in the European Union. Then, of course, Istanbul being really the hub of the big region with the growth coming from Turkish cargo. But we see some other new, let's say, cargo hubs like Baku, and now even Tashkent becoming very interesting. And this is why whenever you want to do business in those regions, take into consideration that the infrastructure to develop air cargo is there. The governments are supporting this development. And you should definitely take this into consideration when you want to create new businesses.
Mario Antonio, thank you. It's fascinating when you see all the strands coming together of economic growth. You had led off with Imran about fiber optic and bringing that, and the internet and internet penetration is very important. Bringing e-commerce together with what that means for your business, Mario Antonio, for Boeing. Fascinating how you're bringing it all together. Claire, let me come back to you, but maybe take a little bit of a different change of the discussion and talk about how public and private investment along the corridor can support our common efforts to address climate change. I don't think anybody in this room will disagree. This is one of the great challenges of our time. And if the corridor continues to grow and succeed, it's going to generate a lot of significant economic activity along the route. Mario Antonio just told us that 33% year-on-year growth in e-commerce alone. Well, that creates a lot of opportunity, obviously. We think of renewables, we think of energy-efficient grids, we think of critical minerals development in the region, but it can also put a strain on water supplies, on water resources, and raise environmental questions given a lot of the subsurface and exploration and production that's involved. I point again to a great World Bank study that talked about the importance of climate resilient infrastructure that was done specifically in the context of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure. So how do you think international financial institutions can play a role to balance the economic growth that we need, but the urgent climate needs that we all have?
Great. So let me come from the perspective of the World Bank. Our mission, if you're not aware, is to end extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity on a livable planet. So this means that sustainability is really at the heart of what we do. We need to ensure that our investments are aligned with both our economic goals as well as our environmental goals. So our investments in the Trans-Caspian corridor are climate informed in two ways. So first, with respect to supporting mitigation, and second, with respect to supporting adaptation. So regarding adaptation, as we just heard, we prioritize green technologies that ensure that our investments in transport and energy along the corridor are climate resilient. So infrastructure that isn't climate resilient ultimately can undermine the very economic benefits that we're trying to generate through those investments. Second, the corridor plays a pivotal role in the decarbonization of the transport system of regional economies. So by promoting the use of cleaner transport modes and technologies, the corridor can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and contribute to our climate change goals. Let me give Türkiye as an example again. In Türkiye, which is the case in much of the rest of the world, it's not possible to decarbonize the economy without decarbonizing the transport sector. In 2019, we measured that the transport sector was responsible for 23% of the country's energy-related GHG emissions. Now, in turn, Türkiye's transport sector cannot be decarbonized without decarbonizing the transportation of freight. Freight transport accounts for half of transportation emissions in the country. And rail freight has a real critical role to play towards meeting Türkiye's goal of decarbonizing its economy. Both facilitating use of rail freight and shifting long-haul trucks to rail are among the most effective ways to do this. We have estimates that Türkiye would cumulatively avoid 252 million tons of CO2 from freight and passenger transport between 2024 and 2060, which is equivalent to 1% of Türkiye's 2023 nominal GDP. I previously gave the example of the corridor that we are supporting between Sivas and the Georgian border. Our investments along this corridor are going to completely electrify the 670 kilometers length of that railway. And so this is an example of how we're significantly can reduce the carbon footprint of Trans-Caspian corridor trade.
Thanks, Claire. That's I love the examples that you're bringing where you're talking about matching the products to the money, which I think is very important. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to give two quick questions for the round here as well, and I'm going to go to Mario Antonio and then to Imran, recognizing our time. So Mario Antonio, to you, as I mentioned before, you've had a lot of experience. We talked a little bit about how you see governments and private sector working together, and you've mentioned a number of areas where you've seen some really good success stories or good best practices that we've seen in the region. You want to highlight a couple of those very briefly, a couple of minutes, if that's possible?
Sure. So the first strong example would be Turkish Airlines and Turkish Cargo. With the growth in the fleet, of course, considering the growth in the region, Turkish Cargo was able, to invest in new assets and catch the growth immediately, and this is why it's a leading model for the region. But if we look again to our examples like Baku and now Tashkent, so the Azerbaijani government has, let's say, has given the chance to a private player, Silkway, which is based in Baku, that today operates mainly from Asia and connects through Baku, Europe, and the US. The demand in Azerbaijan is only, a small portion of what they carry. 90% is then spread, either to Europe or the US or vice versa. And they're doing tremendously very good. And this also, Loic was mentioning about talent. This is also creating a talent pool in logistics, in infrastructure, in e-commerce, and it's very important. And what we are seeing as well in Uzbekistan, with after COVID, and especially with what happened in the north, there are new private entities investing in air cargo. There are now, besides Uzbekistan Airways that has a cargo fleet, there are 3 private players in Uzbekistan, My Freighter, SpaceBees, and I believe FlyHiva. They are getting strong support from the government because they are getting their AOCs, Airline Operating Certificate, and they are now trying to catch more market share and making some partnerships with international players like from Europe and even Latin America. So we see a lot of support from the governments, of course, to get more and more, because e-commerce is growing. So another data maybe, what we estimate is that e-commerce sales will grow to $8.1 trillion by 2026. So it's 29% growth compared to 2023. So what you need to have, e-commerce means I buy today, I want it tomorrow, and the only way is to have an airplane flying or connecting those, let's say, origins and destinations. This is why key investors are investing in air cargo, and what we see is tremendously important. Yeah.
Mario Antonio, thank you very much. Imran, we're going to give you the last word, as the private sector should often have, because you have the most skin in the game. When we were doing some warm-up, you were telling me about how to balance kind of the quick returns and some of the return on investment that might come from short-term projects, but also balancing that in your portfolio for the long-term projects that can be very profitable for a long period of time. Any suggestions from you, 2 or 3 maybe practical steps that regulators, private sector, lenders, and others could take to make this corridor even more successful?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the list of suggestions will be quite long, but if we prioritize to 2 or 3, first of all, I would say for investors, predictability is absolutely crucial. So the regulatory environment needs to provide the investors predictability and transparency about the tariffs, about the trade regulations, about the transit regulations like custom regimes and stuff like that. And one great example is actually would be the Alat free economic zone in Azerbaijan, where they provide special customs regime, tax incentives, as well as one-stop shop for anything that business might need. Another point would be having tools to mitigate certain financial risks when we're talking about long-term infrastructure type of projects. So private partnerships might be one of good examples. Access to different tools like insurances or guarantees, or at the same time, very important and crucial, access to low-cost funding, long-term funding with grace period is important. And last but not least, strengthening regional cooperation is also very crucial here, because it's a middle corridor is about many countries, and the governments need to cooperate. And I would probably end my speech here with a very positive note that it's happening today already. What we observe that the cooperation between Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Georgia has great results. If we used to have 35 to 50 days of delivery time from ports in Kazakhstan to Georgian ports, now we are already talking about 20, 15, and 20 days. We are talking about unpredictable pricing back into 2022. Now we're talking about very transparent and predictable pricing, and that's a great result of cooperation of these countries. So we as a private sector are looking at this opportunity very closely. We observe it very closely, and it's very promising. And we're just, as we do with the Digital Silk Road project, we're waiting for other opportunities to invest alongside the middle corridor.
Imran, thanks for that very positive kind of upswing. I think it's a great way to kind of segue in a little bit. I'm going to ask our organizers if we have any time for questions at all. I'm getting the wave off here, unfortunately, so sorry, you'll have to hit up the wonderful panelists separately, as I think we want to move to the program. But I would just want to say, in just very brief 30-second conclusion, thanks to the panelists. We heard from the private sector, we talked about the importance of debottlenecking all of the routes, not just a port, not just a rail link. It has to be looked at in that way. Claire talked a little bit about the very specific work that the bank is putting into this as well. Looking forward to the December 5th announcement on the Sivas, Georgia. That's real money and that's real work. Maria Antonio talked about the very interesting role of air cargo and that how that is all connected into really, I think that this a model of ensuring that investment works and stays in the countries where it is I think a core ethos of how American companies operate, working with our partners all throughout the territory. I really want to thank Imran for closing on a great note, talking about the importance of investor predictability, about the importance of tariffs and they be predictable. You mentioned a lot as well in Baku. But that I think it was very interesting to hear that final data point, moving from 35 to 50 days from Kazakhstan to Georgia, now down to 15 to 20 days. We're going literally in the right direction. So with that, I want to thank, if you could please join me for Imran Ahmadzada, NEQSOL Holding, Claire Hollweg, World Bank, and Mario Antonio Ebcim of Boeing. Thank you very much, all of you.